The forest breathed like something alive. Mist drifted low across the ground, curling around roots and fallen branches. And then, a shape moved inside it. Massive. Silent. Older than memory. Two horns cut through the haze like blades of moonlight. To villagers, this was no ordinary animal. This was power shaped into flesh. A creature whispered about in stories told beside firelight. They called it the Aurochs, the wild giant that once ruled Europe. A beast so large, so relentless, so deeply woven into human history, that our lives, our cattle, our myths, all trace back to its shadow. But the world that shaped it was disappearing. And the giant was disappearing with it. Tonight, we follow its trail. Through ancient forests. Across icy plains. Into battles for territory, survival, and the right to exist. And then, we walk with it through its final, heartbreaking hours. Because the story of the Aurochs is not just about an extinction. It's about a warning. A warning written in hoofprints that fade a little more each year. The name Aurochs comes from old European languages, a word with weight, shaped by tongues that lived close to forests and rivers. Its scientific title, Bos primigenius, reveals what it truly was. The original cattle. The first of its kind. The ancestor of every cow we know today. But the wild Aurochs was no gentle farm animal. It was enormous. Bulls could stand up to 2 meters tall at the shoulder, towering over even the largest modern cattle. Their bodies were black, glossy, powerful, every muscle built for endurance. Their horns curved forward in long, elegant arcs, growing up to 80 centimeters long. Cows were smaller but carried a deep reddish-brown coat that glowed in sunlight. Their world was vast. The Aurochs roamed from the Atlantic coasts of Europe to the Middle East, from the lush forests of Poland to the hot, dry stretches of North Africa, and deep into India. Wherever grass grew, the Aurochs followed. Ancient humans carved them on rock walls in the Lascaux caves of France, some of the oldest art in human history. Massive bodies. Sickle-shaped horns. Eyes that seemed alive even in charcoal. Julius Caesar himself described them in Commentarii de Bello Gallico, calling them fierce, fast, and as large as the biggest bulls he had ever seen. Their presence defined landscapes. Herds opened forest floors and shaped clearings. Their grazing patterns created ecological mosaics where countless species thrived. But humans didn't just watch them, they studied them. For thousands of years, small populations of Aurochs were slowly domesticated, leading to the birth of cattle, the animals that today feed billions. And yet the wild giants themselves refused to be tamed. They remained something else entirely. Restless. Unpredictable. A symbol of raw, untouched nature. This was not just another animal. The Aurochs was a sculptor of ecosystems. A force woven into our earliest mythology. But even the strongest forces can fall. And for the Aurochs, the cracks in their world were already beginning to spread. To understand the Aurochs, you must picture not just an animal, but an entire way of moving through the world. Their day began before sunrise. In the blue-gray quiet of morning, herds stirred in the tall grass. Steam rose from their bodies in the cold air. Calves pressed close to their mothers. Dominant bulls watched the horizon for wolves, bears, or humans. Then the movement began. Slow. Deliberate. Unstoppable. The Aurochs were grazers, but not only grazers. Their diet shifted with the seasons and the landscapes they crossed. In rich valleys they ate grasses and flowering herbs. In dense forests they browsed on leaves, twigs, bark. In autumn they devoured acorns to build fat for winter. They were adaptable, flexible, built for survival. And they could travel far. Herds walked dozens of kilometers in a day, shaping trails that would become the first migration routes across Europe. These same trails later guided people, livestock, armies, the foundation of early human movement across the continent. But it wasn't just what they ate, it was how they lived. Auroch society was structured, complex, and often violent. Dominant bulls controlled access to the herd. They fought for status with earth-shaking force, horns clashing, hooves digging trenches into the soil, breath steaming like smoke from dragons. These fights determined everything. Who would mate? Who would lead migrations? Who would stand guard when danger approached? During mating season, bulls became unpredictable. A calm meadow could turn into a battleground in seconds. Yet outside these challenges, Aurochs herds were peaceful. Cows formed close bonds. They communicated with grunts, snorts, low bellows that rolled across the land. Calves stayed with their mothers for months, learning the difference between the alarm call for wolves and the warning call for humans. Their defenses were legendary. A charging Aurochs could reach 55 kilometers per hour, its head lowered, horns aimed like spears. Wolves learned to respect the horns. Bears targeted only calves or sick individuals. Even early humans sometimes hesitated, because hunting an Aurochs meant gambling with death. But the Aurochs was more than muscle. It was an engineer of its environment. By grazing intensely in some areas and lightly in others, the herds created patterns in vegetation that allowed wildflowers, new grasses, insects, and birds to flourish. They opened up dense forest patches, making room for deer, wild horses, and boar. They were not just part of the ecosystem. They shaped it. But as the centuries passed, the world reshaped itself, and not in their favor. Life for the Aurochs followed cycles timed to the turning of the earth. As autumn winds swept across Europe, something ancient stirred within the herds. This was the rutting season, the time when bulls stepped forward, their muscles tense, their horns angled toward rivals, their breath steaming in the cold. A single moment could decide the future of the herd. Dominant bulls approached cows with low, rhythmic grunts. Younger bulls hovered at the edges, waiting for an opportunity or a mistake. But opportunities rarely came. A dominant Aurochs bull was a fortress, a symbol of unbroken survival. He had fought for his rights, sometimes year after year. His reward? A brief chance to continue his bloodline. Mating was intense, short, and often followed by explosive fights as other bulls made desperate final attempts to challenge the outcome. Months passed. Winter settled over the land. Snow gathered in the hollows of forest floors. But spring always returned, and with it, new life. A calf's birth was silent except for the soft grunt of its mother. She chose secluded areas, surrounded by tall grass or woodland shadows, away from wolves and prying eyes. A newborn Aurochs calf stood within an hour. Wobbly, wide-eyed, already imprinted with the scent of its mother. The bond between cow and calf was fierce. 4 months, the mother shielded her young from predators, harsh weather, and even the aggression of other herd members. Calves learned everything by watching her. How to read alarm calls. Where to find the safest grazing spots. Which rivers were safe to cross. How to recognize the profile of a wolf against distant grass. By their second year, young bulls began wandering. Drawn by instinct, they formed bachelor groups, testing strength, practicing confrontations that would define their adult lives. Females stayed closer to the core herd, learning social cues, integrating into a flow thousands of years old. Life expectancy in the wild was often 18 to 20 years, although predators, disease, or harsh winters could cut that short. But the pattern was stable, predictable, ancient, until the world around them changed, faster than the herds could adapt. To other animals, the Aurochs was both a neighbor and a force of nature. Predators inhabited the same landscapes. Wolves shadowed the herds, waiting for calves that lagged behind or individuals weakened by winter. Bears, particularly in the colder regions, targeted the sick and the old. Even lynx occasionally tested young calves on forest edges. But for healthy adults? No predator dared challenge a full-grown bull. A single charge could break a spine, send wolves scattering, or overturn any creature foolish enough to stand in its way. Yet predation wasn't the only relationship. Competitors shared the land too. Red deer grazed alongside them. Wild horses crossed the same plains. Boar rooted through the soil the Aurochs trampled. But these animals didn't just live with the Aurochs, they benefited from them. When Aurochs grazed heavily in one area, sunlight reached the soil, allowing new plants to sprout. These openings created niches for birds, insects, and mammals. In many ways, the Aurochs was a gardener tending the wild landscapes of Europe. And then there was the most complicated relationship of all: humans. Ancient hunters revered the Aurochs. They carved it into cave walls. They incorporated it into myths. But as humans shifted from hunting to farming, the dynamic changed. A Aurochs competed with crops. It threatened livestock. It challenged the boundaries humans were trying to create. This competition didn't turn humans into predators. It turned them into rivals. And in the end, rivals became the greatest threat of all. The world of the Aurochs was never gentle. But for thousands of years, it was manageable. Then came the pressures that no species could endure. 1. Habitat loss. As agriculture spread across Europe, vast forests were cleared for crops and grazing animals. Wetlands dried. Meadows shrank. Migration routes that had existed for millennia were cut off by fences and farms. Every year, the Aurochs world grew smaller. 2. Hunting pressure. Early humans hunted them for food. Later, kings and nobles hunted them for sport. Aurochs' horns became trophies. Their hides became symbols of status. Royal hunts reduced populations faster than they could recover. 3. Competition with domesticated cattle. The cattle descended from the Aurochs now competed with their ancestors for the same land. They brought disease. They spread parasites. They drew human attention and protection, something the wild Aurochs never received. 4. Climate fluctuations. Cold winters. Late springs. Floods. Droughts. A changing climate strained herds that were already struggling. 5. Low reproduction rate. Cows produced only one calf per year. If that calf died, to wolves, hunger, or human hunters, an entire year of reproductive effort vanished. The numbers dropped. Then dropped again. Then again. By the late medieval period, the Aurochs was gone from most of Europe. Their world was collapsing. The end began quietly. By the 1400s, the once vast Aurochs herds had shrunk to scattered pockets in Eastern Europe and the Baltic regions. The Jaktaro forest in Poland became their final sanctuary. Protected by royal decree, the last herd survived under the watch of appointed wardens. But protection wasn't enough. Records from the 1500s show alarming declines. Dozens became a handful. A handful became a few. By 1601, only 3 individuals remained. Wardens monitored them, fed them in harsh winters, guarded them against poachers. But fate was already sealed. In 1627, the last known Aurochs, a cow, was found dead in the Jaktaro forest. Her death was recorded simply, from natural causes. And with her passing, Europe lost one of its greatest giants. Some legends claim remnant groups survived longer, hidden in remote forests. But none were confirmed. The lineage ended. Silently. Completely. Irreversibly. The great horns that once shaped forests fell into dust. But the lesson? That still lives and demands to be heard. When we look back at the fall of the Aurochs, the question burns hotter than any campfire story. Could we have saved them? The honest answer? Yes. If we had acted sooner. The tragedy of the Aurochs isn't that it faded overnight. It's that the warning signs were clear long before the last cow died in 1627. The first step toward saving them would have been habitat protection **, large, connected reserves where herds could migrate freely, without fences, farms, or encroaching settlements. Next would have been strict hunting limits. Not the symbolic protections of the medieval kings, but real, enforced laws that punished poaching and stopped elite hunts from wiping out entire herds in a single season. And then, perhaps the most important of all, we would have needed to separate domestic cattle from wild herds. Most historians now agree. Disease spillover from livestock may have accelerated the collapse more than anything else. Imagine if early naturalists had existed, people who understood genetics and conservation. They might have tracked bloodlines, protected pregnant cows, and built breeding programs centuries before the concept existed. It sounds impossible. But remember, humans domesticated the Aurochs relatives thousands of years earlier. We absolutely had the knowledge, we just didn't have the mindset. The world saw the Aurochs as a resource, a trophy, a challenge, rarely as a species worth protecting. And by the time people realized the loss, it was too late. Today, several breeding back projects try to recreate animals that resemble the Aurochs, using cattle breeds that carry ancient traits. These efforts produce impressive results, but they are echoes, not resurrections. Nothing can replace the real Aurochs, its ancient bloodline, its ecological role, its towering presence. So what is the lesson? That conservation must begin before a species becomes rare, before it dwindles, before it slips quietly into the night. Because extinction does not arrive with a roar. It arrives with silence. A silence that once carried hoofbeats and now carries warning. Close your eyes. Listen. Do you hear it? The whisper of grass bending under heavy steps, the deep rumble of a bellow rolling across a valley, the echo of horns slicing through the dawn. This is the ghost of the Aurochs, a creature that shaped our world long before we shaped it in return. Its shadow lives in every pasture, in every herd of cattle grazing beneath the sun, in every trail that was once carved by hooves bigger than your outstretched arm. The Aurochs is gone, but its fingerprint remains everywhere. It lives in our agriculture, in our history, in our stories, in our genes. And maybe that's why its extinction hurt so deeply. Because this wasn't some distant dinosaur lost to time we never touched. This was an animal that walked beside us, fought beside us, fed us, challenged us, and defined the landscapes we still call home. The last Aurochs died alone in a quiet forest in Poland. No grand battle. No dramatic final chase. Just a fading heartbeat in a world that had already shifted beyond recognition. But its legacy? That lives on every time someone asks, could we have saved them? What could we have done differently? And how do we stop this from happening again? So as you watch this documentary, as the final images fade into shadow, remember this. The story of the Aurochs is also the story of the future. Because every species alive today stands on the same fragile edge. Their survival depends on whether we learn from the silence the Aurochs left behind. If this story moved you, hit like to support the channel, subscribe for more cinematic animal documentaries, and tell me in the comments. White right pointing backhand index, which extinct creature should I bring back to life next through storytelling? Your suggestion might shape the next episode.